My name is Kate Dubois, and for a lifetime I existed in the periphery of a world that demanded center stage. Greenwich, Connecticut, a name whispered with reverence in certain circles, was my gilded cage. It was a town woven from threads of old money, pristine lawns, and an unspoken, almost suffocating expectation of perfection. My childhood unfolded against this backdrop, a tableau vivant where every carefully manicured rosebush seemed to hold more weight, more inherent value than my own developing sense of self. And then there was Sarah, my sister, 3 years my junior, a blonde, blue-eyed meteor who effortlessly commanded every spotlight. She was the family's golden child, a designation whispered with a knowing nod by our parents and echoed by their equally discerning friends. Sarah's laughter, bright and melodious, was a constant soundtrack to my more muted existence. Her presence was a vibrant, undeniable splash of color against my quieter, more introspective hues. From the tender age of 3, Sarah possessed an innate ability to magnetize attention. Her childish tantrums, far from being disciplined, were reframed by our mother as spirited expressions of a burgeoning personality. Her precocious demands, which would have landed me in time out, were indulged as early signs of leadership qualities. It was a narrative carefully crafted, meticulously maintained. My own attempts at creativity, my quiet triumphs, a meticulously researched and illustrated science fair project that won district-wide recognition, a poignant short story published in the local literary magazine, were met with polite, almost dismissive nods. These small victories, significant to me, would inevitably be overshadowed, sometimes within minutes, by Sarah's cheerleading trophies, her starring role in the annual school play, or her effortless charm at a family gathering. "Oh, that's sweet, darling," my mother would say, her hand briefly touching my arm, her gaze already drifting towards Sarah, who was typically holding court with a group of admiring adults. "But did you see Sarah's grand plie in the ballet recital? Simply divine. Such grace." My father, a stern, impeccably dressed attorney whose very presence exuded quiet power, would offer similar backhanded compliments. "You're undeniably clever, Kate, a good head on your shoulders." But Sarah, now she has a natural flair for public speaking, for connecting with people. That's where the real power lies, in influencing others. It was a constant, almost imperceptible erosion of my nascent self-worth, a relentless, unspoken message that my quiet strength, my introspective nature, my artistic inclinations, my very essence, was simply not enough. I learned by necessity to recede, to blend into the background, to be agreeable, to not under any circumstances rock the perfectly balanced yet precarious boat of our family dynamic. In a town where image was paramount, where every resident was, in essence, performing for an unseen audience, I was the one whose image was always slightly out of focus, blurred at the edges, a faint, almost ethereal echo of the dazzling, undeniable Sarah. My refuge, my sanctuary from this relentless comparison, was my Aunt Carol. She was my mother's older sister, the family's designated black sheep, a title she wore with a defiant, almost regal pride. Aunt Carol refused to conform to the rigid social strictures of Greenwich. While my parents meticulously curated their life, hosting elegant cocktail parties for hedge fund managers and prominent philanthropists in their pristine colonial mansion, a monument to understated wealth, Aunt Carol lived in a world of her own making. Her home, an old, sprawling Victorian, stood a few winding streets away from the most exclusive, gated enclaves. It was slightly unkempt, gloriously ramshackle, yet it hummed with an undeniable life force, brimming with character and a sense of history that resonated deeply with my own soul. She affectionately referred to it as the Haven, a name that perfectly captured its essence for the few who truly understood her. This house wasn't the largest, nor the most architecturally significant in a town obsessed with grandeur, but it possessed a unique, almost palpable historical presence. Whispers of its origins as one of the original homesteads in the area, dating back to colonial times, added to its mystique. Hidden gardens, wild and untamed, bloomed in unexpected corners, and secret nooks offered quiet contemplation. Aunt Carol was a sculptor, a painter, a free spirit whose passport bore the stamps of countless exotic lands. She returned from her travels with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes, a deep, resonant laugh, and a profound, almost philosophical disdain for pretense and social artifice. Crucially, Aunt Carol saw me. She saw the quiet, observant girl behind the shadow of her brilliant sister. She celebrated my introspective nature, my artistic leanings, my deeply empathetic spirit, qualities that my parents either overlooked or dismissed as weaknesses. She would often invite me to the Haven, a welcome escape from the suffocating expectations of my parents' meticulously ordered home. There, amidst the riotous, untamed sprawl of roses and the earthy, comforting scent of turpentine and oil paints, she would patiently teach me the alchemy of color mixing, the tactile joy of molding clay, the profound beauty found in imperfection. "Kate," she'd say, her voice a warm, husky rasp from years of chain-smoking and hearty laughter. "Your sister, she shines bright, yes, like a supernova. But you, my dear, you glow from within, a deep, steady, enduring light. Never ever let anyone, not even your own family, dim that inner radiance." She instilled in me a quiet but formidable sense of self-worth, a bedrock of confidence that my parents, in their understandable but ultimately damaging adoration of Sarah, had inadvertently, almost systematically, crushed. Aunt Carol often spoke of the enduring spirit of her home, its long and storied history, its staunch refusal to conform to the fleeting whims of modern aesthetics. "This house, Kate, it has a soul, a stubborn, resilient soul, just like you, and you must never, ever allow yourself to be swallowed by the superficiality of this town, to sell your essence to those soulless developers who would happily flatten history for another sterile glass box, another sterile existence." She was my anchor, my confidant, the keeper of my true self in a world that insisted on a polished, superficial version. When Aunt Carol passed away peacefully in her sleep last year, it was, with an almost predictable inevitability, Sarah who immediately took charge of all the important arrangements. The funeral, rather than a solemn remembrance, morphed into a meticulously orchestrated social event, a subtly disguised networking opportunity within the grieving. I, in turn, sat quietly in the back pew, my heart a heavy stone in my chest, truly mourning the loss of the woman who had been my lighthouse, my safe harbor. A few weeks later, the family converged once more, this time in the sterile, hushed confines of a lawyer's office for the reading of the will. My parents, their faces carefully composed, Sarah and her equally impeccably dressed husband, and I sat stiffly on uncomfortable leather chairs, anticipating the predictable division of what we assumed were modest assets. The expectation was that Aunt Carol, the eccentric, would have left her meager estate to some equally eccentric cause. The lawyer, a man with a surprisingly compassionate gaze, cleared his throat. "To my beloved niece, Kate Dubois." My head, which had been bowed in quiet reflection, snapped up, my eyes wide with disbelief. Across the room, Sarah, ever the master of inappropriate timing, actually snorted, a derisive sound escaping her perfectly sculpted lips. I leave the Haven, with all its quirks and charms, its history and its heart. A stunned, almost profound silence descended upon the room, so thick you could almost taste it. Then Sarah, recovering her composure with remarkable speed, burst into a peal of laughter that, to me, sounded brittle and false. The Haven? That old money pit? That crumbling relic? Aunt Carol always did have a twisted sense of humor. Good luck with the leaky roof and the ghost infestation, Kate. You'll need it. My parents, clearly mortified by Sarah's outburst, quickly tried to pivot the conversation. Their voices a little too loud, a little too strained, dismissing the inheritance as a mere novelty, a burden even. They, in their pragmatic, wealth-obsessed world, simply couldn't conceive of its intrinsic value, its profound emotional significance, beyond its purely financial market price. They saw only the deferred maintenance, the lack of modern amenities, the potential drain on resources. The lawyer, however, continued, his voice cutting through their awkward chatter. He then added a peculiar, almost theatrical, clause that seemed to be a final, mischievous wink from Aunt Carol herself. The full details of the deed transfer and any attached conditions, including specific historical easements and preservation covenants, will only be revealed upon my personal instruction to Kate Dubois, 1 year from the exact date of my passing. This period is designed to ensure the integrity of the property's legacy and to provide sufficient time for the inheritor to prepare for its unique stewardship. My parents and Sarah exchanged bewildered glances then, true to form, collectively shrugged it off. It was just another one of Aunt Carol's endearing, if slightly inconvenient, eccentricities. But I, in my heart of hearts, felt a powerful, almost electric flicker of hope, a whisper of a grander, more profound promise. Knowing that the haven, my haven, was now secretly mine, waiting for me, was a secret balm to my wounded soul. It was a beacon of authenticity in a world of artifice, a quiet promise of a future where I might finally own something truly mine, a place where I could be free from their judgment, free to simply be. The year couldn't come fast enough, Sarah, a woman who measured success in social currency and tangible assets, effortlessly dismissed Aunt Carol's passing and my unusual inheritance as a trivial, almost comical, footnote in her own magnificent narrative. Her laser focus was already firmly fixed on her latest, most coveted acquisition, the presidency of the prestigious Homeowners Association, or HOA, for our exclusive, almost suffocatingly perfect community. This wasn't merely a volunteer position. It was a gleaming, diamond-studded crown in her meticulously curated social kingdom. The HOA in our corner of Greenwich wielded immense, almost autocratic power, dictating everything from the precise shade of beige for your mailbox to the specific species of shrub you were permitted to plant. It was a mini-monarchy, a self-appointed oligarchy of taste and control. And Sarah, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, her dazzling yet entirely manufactured facade of effortless grace, and her formidable, unyielding will, was its new, undisputed queen. Her ascent to this coveted position was, of course, celebrated by our parents as yet another triumph, further solidifying her already unassailable status as the very embodiment of success and social cachet. "That's my girl," my father, his chest puffed out with pride, boomed over a Sunday brunch, clinking his champagne glass with Sarah's. Always seizing opportunities, always leading the pack, always showing them how it's done. My mother, her eyes gleaming with vicarious satisfaction, simply beamed, already mentally redecorating Sarah's living room for the elegant garden parties she envisioned Sarah hosting for the HOA board members. For me, however, Sarah's new, elevated role merely served to amplify the relentless barrage of daily microaggressions, transforming them from subtle slights into overt displays of power. Her presidency became a formidable new tool, allowing her to subtly and sometimes not so subtly remind me of my subordinate place, or more accurately, my crushing lack thereof in the social hierarchy. I still resided in my modest, though perfectly charming townhouse, a stark and often uncomfortable contrast to Sarah's sprawling multi-acre estate, situated just a few blocks away in an even more exclusive section of the neighborhood. My continued presence in this community, though perfectly legitimate and economically sound for me, was often met with a dismissive raised eyebrow or a condescending, carefully worded remark from Sarah. "Oh, Kate, darling, you're still using that old gardener?" she'd inquire, her voice laced with mock concern during a chance encounter at the local market. "You know, the HOA recommends only certified, fully insured professionals now. We wouldn't want to bring down property values for everyone, would we?" On another occasion, she'd bring up a trivial, almost absurd, HOA regulation, knowing full well it barely affected my property, but using it as a public demonstration of her newfound, unchallengeable authority. Once, during a contentious community meeting, she even went so far as to suggest a mandatory, community-wide aesthetic upgrade for all boundary fences, knowing full well that my old, perfectly functional wooden fence, though not designer, would incur a significant, almost prohibitive cost for me. My parents, predictably, would always side with her, echoing her sentiments with an air of practiced conviction. "It's for the greater good of the community, dear. Property values, you know. We must all contribute to maintaining the standard." The bitter irony of it all was, of course, not lost on me. While Sarah wielded her formidable power to enforce the most superficial of aesthetic standards, I, in stark contrast, was quietly battling my own personal and professional demons. My work as a freelance graphic designer, though immensely creatively fulfilling and intellectually stimulating, rarely provided the kind of consistent, opulent income that defined the lives of the residents in our ultra-wealthy town. I found myself locked in a relentless, exhausting battle, constantly struggling to maintain the delicate facade of an affluent lifestyle, ensuring my aging car was always meticulously clean, my small garden perpetually tidy, my clothes impeccably chosen, all in a desperate, often futile, attempt to avoid Sarah's mercilessly judgmental gaze and the pervasive, unspoken criticism of our parents. There were months, more often than I cared to admit, when making ends meet was a genuine, almost soul-crushing struggle. An unexpected medical bill for a lingering ailment, a major client project inexplicably falling through, or a sudden downturn in the freelance market. Any of these minor catastrophes could send my meticulously constructed financial house of cards tumbling down. I worked tirelessly, late into the nights, my eyes burning from the glow of my monitor, relentlessly hustling for new contracts, meticulously balancing my budget, every dollar accounted for, every expense scrutinized. My small, hard-earned savings, initially earmarked for a much-needed, modest renovation of my own cherished townhouse, slowly, painfully dwindled away, a constant reminder of my precarious financial reality. I bore the heavy burden of my struggles in a profound, almost pathological silence, never daring to confide in my parents. I knew with an almost chilling certainty that their solution would be a condescending offer of a loan, a thinly veiled charitable gesture that would only serve to reinforce my perceived inadequacy, my perpetual status as the less successful, less capable daughter. Sarah, meanwhile, would continue to casually post a relentless stream of photos on her impeccably curated social media feeds. Lavish, sun-drenched vacations in exotic locales, sparkling new luxury cars parked ostentatiously in her sprawling driveway, exquisitely designed interior shots of her multi-million-dollar mansion. Each perfectly filtered post was a subtle, yet undeniably potent, emotional stab, a constant digital reminder of the vast, ever-widening chasm between our two vastly different lives. I yearned, with a desperate, almost physical ache, to finally break free from this suffocating cycle, to stop playing this endless, exhausting game of maintaining a carefully constructed image for a family that, I deeply suspected, barely saw me, barely acknowledged my true self, but I was trapped, not by overt financial chains, but by the invisible yet profoundly binding bonds of familial expectation and the desperate, lingering, almost childish hope that one day, Just one glorious day, they would finally see my quiet efforts, my untold sacrifices, my inherent undeniable worth. The Haven, Aunt Carol's mysterious, slightly dilapidated property remained my only secret hope, a quiet, whispered promise of a future where I might finally own something truly, unequivocally mine, a place where I could breathe freely, where I could simply be, unfettered by their incessant judgment. But the crucial one-year waiting period wasn't up, not yet. And until that fateful day, I knew I had to continue fighting this invisible, exhausting battle, one meticulously paid bill, one hard-won client contract, one silently endured slight at a time. The countdown continued, a quiet ticking in the background of my turbulent life. The annual HOA meeting was never merely a gathering to discuss community issues. It was a meticulously choreographed social event, a grand performance designed to reinforce the established hierarchy and display the latest acquisitions of power and prestige. This particular year, however, held an almost palpable tension, a heightened significance. Sarah, still basking in the glow of her first term as president, had proposed a deeply controversial, indeed audacious initiative, a mandatory community beautification fund. This fund, she argued with practiced grace, would require substantial, non-negotiable contributions from every homeowner, ostensibly to elevate the aesthetic standards of our already impossibly exclusive neighborhood. But everyone, especially those like me who understood the subtle undercurrents of power in Greenwich, knew it was a thinly veiled, ruthlessly efficient tactic. It was a strategic maneuver designed to discreetly, yet effectively, force out any homeowners who might struggle to afford the exorbitant, often arbitrary fees, thereby further cementing the area's ultra-exclusive reputation. For me, this fund was not merely a proposed bylaw. It was a direct existential threat. The projected fees, even with my most fervent efforts and careful budgeting, would undoubtedly be a crushing, unsustainable blow to my already precariously balanced finances. If Sarah's initiative passed, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I might be left with no option but to sell my modest, beloved townhouse, the last tangible vestige of my hard-won independence in this town. I had prepared for this meeting with a meticulousness born of desperation. For weeks, every spare moment, every late night, had been dedicated to dissecting HOA bylaws, poring over complex legal documents, and researching every possible loophole. I had gathered a formidable dossier of evidence, carefully constructing a logical, fact-based argument against the fund's potential overreach and its discriminatory implications. It was, I knew, a colossal long shot, a David and Goliath battle against Sarah's formidable influence. But it was my only chance, my last stand. I dressed with painstaking care that evening, selecting a smart, yet deliberately understated, charcoal business suit. My intention was clear: to project an image of unshakable competence, of serious professionalism rather than desperation. My stomach churned with a volatile mix of acute anxiety, the familiar dread of public confrontation, and a defiant, almost incandescent flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, if I presented myself as a formidable, intelligent opponent, Sarah would, for once, see me as something more than just her overshadowed, less successful sister. The meeting was scheduled to take place in the opulent, almost intimidating, grand ballroom of the prestigious Greenwich Country Club, a place where I had always felt profoundly out of place, an alien in a gilded cage. As I approached the entrance, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I saw it. A plush velvet rope symbolically cordoning off the registration table, presided over by Sarah herself. She stood there, a vision of effortless luxury, resplendent in a custom-designed dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her blonde hair coiffed into a perfect, impenetrable helmet. Her smile, dazzling and entirely artificial, stretched across her face as she greeted each arriving homeowner with a practiced air of condescending familiarity. Beside her, a young, impeccably dressed real estate agent, clearly fresh out of business school and radiating an eager, almost desperate, desire to impress, dutifully checked off names on a pristine guest list. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and dread. This was it, the precipice, the moment of truth. I took a deep, fortifying breath, adjusted the lapels of my suit, and walked towards them, my head held as high as I could manage, my gaze fixed on the daunting task ahead. Sarah, with her almost preternatural ability to zero in on any perceived weakness, spotted me immediately. A slow, cruel smile, a predator's grin, unfurled across her perfectly made-up face. Her eyes, usually glittering with a cold ambition, now held a glint of pure, unadulterated malice. She waited, deliberately, until I was directly in front of her, the eager young real estate agent poised with his clipboard, pencil at the ready. "Well, well, if it isn't little Kate," she purred, her voice dripping with a sugary yet utterly venomous condescension, carefully modulated to be just loud enough for those nearby to hear. She then turned her gaze towards the young agent, allowing a theatrical sigh to escape her lips, feigning a profound, almost sympathetic regret. "I'm so terribly sorry, dear. I'm afraid she's not on the list." My blood ran cold, a glacial river coursing through my veins. My meticulously constructed composure, the fragile shield I had built, began to show its first ominous cracks. "Sarah," I managed, my voice a strained whisper, "what in heaven's name are you talking about? I'm a homeowner, a legitimate resident of this community. I have every right to be here. This meeting is about the community fund. A proposal that affects all of us." She merely laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard, utterly devoid of genuine mirth. "Oh, Kate, bless your heart. You really do live in your own little world, don't you? This, darling, is a private association meeting, reserved exclusively for members of the HOA. You see," she continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was infuriatingly, still perfectly audible to those curious ears nearby, "while you technically own a property within the general vicinity, you've never quite, how should I put it? You've never quite fit in. You're not exactly part of the inner circle, are you? Not really part of us, not part of the people who truly matter." She leaned in even further, her expensive perfume assaulting my senses, her words laced with an unbearable, almost physically painful blend of pity and scorn. "Frankly, your presence here, darling, just brings down the tone. It really does. So no, sweetie, you're not part of the homeowners association." My face burned with a familiar, suffocating shame. The young real estate agent, sensing the escalating tension, shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his eyes darting frantically between us, his youthful face a mask of acute embarrassment. My entire body felt like it was suddenly encased in lead, heavy, immobile, suffocated. The familiar crushing weight of invisibility, of being summarily dismissed, of being utterly discounted, crashed down on me with a renewed, devastating force. This was Sarah's masterpiece of humiliation, meticulously planned, perfectly executed, designed to destroy me in front of the very people whose respect I desperately sought. She wasn't merely barring me from a meeting. She was, with surgical precision, barring me from belonging, from existing within her perfectly curated, exclusive world. The familiar pang of shame, the tightening knot in my stomach, the scorching heat creeping up my neck, it was all there. Every ghost of 1,000 past slights rising from the depths of my memory, swirling around me, threatening to consume me whole. But this time, something felt different. Beneath the shame, a tiny, defiant spark ignited, a nascent ember of rage that refused to be extinguished. This was the moment. The final straw. Just as Sarah, her eyes glittering with triumphant malice, was about to dismiss me with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand, a new figure stepped gracefully into the charged atmosphere, moving with an almost preternatural calm. He was Mr. Davies, the senior real estate agent, a man whose name was synonymous with integrity and discretion in the highest echelons of Greenwich property dealings. His tailored suit seemed to exude an aura of quiet, almost unimpeachable authority, and his presence immediately commanded a different kind of respect than Sarah's theatrical posturing. He had been quietly observing the unfolding drama from a discreet distance, a curious, almost knowing expression playing on his lips. He walked directly to Sarah, his face composed, a polite but firm smile on his lips. "Mrs. Dubois," he began, his voice calm yet carrying, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the growing crowd. "I believe there's been a slight, though rather significant, misunderstanding." He then turned his steady gaze to me, and to my utter astonishment, offered me a small, almost imperceptible wink. "Miss Dubois, I must sincerely apologize for the delay. I had genuinely hoped to catch you before the meeting began, to present you with some crucial documents. However, your sister," he paused, a slight, almost imperceptible lift of an eyebrow, "seemed quite assertive in her duties, shall we say." He then extended his hand, a gesture of genuine warmth and respect, one that instantly unknotted the tension in my shoulders and sent a surprising jolt of hope through my exhausted frame. This particular year, however, held an almost palpable tension, a heightened significance. Sarah, still basking in the glow of her first term as president, had proposed a deeply controversial, indeed audacious, initiative, a mandatory community beautification fund. This fund, she argued with practiced grace, would require substantial, non-negotiable contributions from every homeowner, ostensibly to elevate the aesthetic standards of our already impossibly exclusive neighborhood. But everyone, especially those like me who understood the subtle undercurrents of power in Greenwich, knew it was a thinly veiled, ruthlessly efficient tactic. It was a strategic maneuver designed to discreetly yet effectively force out any homeowners who might struggle to afford the exorbitant, often arbitrary fees, thereby further cementing the area's ultra-exclusive reputation. For me, this fund was not merely a proposed bylaw. It was a direct existential threat. The projected fees, even with my most fervent efforts and careful budgeting, would undoubtedly be a crushing, unsustainable blow to my already precariously balanced finances. If Sarah's initiative passed, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I might be left with no option but to sell my modest, beloved townhouse, the last tangible vestige of my hard-won independence in this town. I had prepared for this meeting with a meticulousness born of desperation. For weeks, every spare moment, every late night, had been dedicated to dissecting HOA bylaws, poring over complex legal documents, and researching every possible loophole. I had gathered a formidable dossier of evidence, carefully constructing a logical, fact-based argument against the fund's potential overreach and its discriminatory implications. It was, I knew, a colossal long shot, a David and Goliath battle against Sarah's formidable influence. But it was my only chance, my last stand. I dressed with painstaking care that evening, selecting a smart yet deliberately understated charcoal business suit. My intention was clear: to project an image of unshakable competence, of serious professionalism, rather than desperation. My stomach churned with a volatile mix of acute anxiety, the familiar dread of public confrontation, and a defiant, almost incandescent flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, if I presented myself as a formidable, intelligent opponent, Sarah would, for once, see me as something more than just her overshadowed, less successful sister. The meeting was scheduled to take place in the opulent, almost intimidating, grand ballroom of the prestigious Greenwich Country Club, a place where I had always felt profoundly out of place, an alien in a gilded cage. As I approached the entrance, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I saw it. A plush velvet rope, symbolically cordoning off the registration table, presided over by Sarah herself. She stood there, a vision of effortless luxury, resplendent in a custom-designed dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her blonde hair coiffed into a perfect, impenetrable helmet. Her smile, dazzling and entirely artificial, stretched across her face as she greeted each arriving homeowner with a practiced air of condescending familiarity. Beside her, a young, impeccably dressed real estate agent, clearly fresh out of business school and radiating an eager, almost desperate, desire to impress, dutifully checked off names on a pristine guest list. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and dread. This was it. The precipice. The moment of truth. I took a deep, fortifying breath, adjusted the lapels of my suit, and walked towards them. My head held as high as I could manage, my gaze fixed on the daunting task ahead. Sarah, with her almost preternatural ability to zero in on any perceived weakness, spotted me immediately. A slow, cruel smile, a predator's grin, unfurled across her perfectly made-up face. Her eyes, usually glittering with a cold ambition, now held a glint of pure, unadulterated malice. She waited, deliberately, until I was directly in front of her, the eager young real estate agent poised with his clipboard, pencil at the ready. "Well, well, if it isn't little Kate," she purred, her voice dripping with a sugary yet utterly venomous condescension, carefully modulated to be just loud enough for those nearby to hear. She then turned her gaze towards the young agent, allowing a theatrical sigh to escape her lips, feigning a profound, almost sympathetic regret. "I'm so terribly sorry, dear. I'm afraid she's not on the list." My blood ran cold, a glacial river coursing through my veins. My meticulously constructed composure, the fragile shield I had built, began to show its first ominous cracks. "Sarah," I managed, my voice a strained whisper, "what in heaven's name are you talking about? I'm a homeowner, a legitimate resident of this community. I have every right to be here. This meeting is about the community fund, a proposal that affects all of us." She merely laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard, utterly devoid of genuine mirth. "Oh, Kate, bless your heart. You really do live in your own little world, don't you? This, darling, is a private association meeting, reserved exclusively for members of the HOA. You see," she continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was infuriatingly, still perfectly audible to those curious ears nearby, "while you technically own a property within the general vicinity, you've never quite, how should I put it? You've never quite fit in. You're not exactly part of the inner circle, are you? Not really part of us. Not part of the people who truly matter." She leaned in even further, her expensive perfume assaulting my senses, her words laced with an unbearable, almost physically painful, blend of pity and scorn. "Frankly, your presence here, darling, just brings down the tone. It really does. So no, sweetie, you're not part of the homeowners association." My face burned with a familiar, suffocating shame. The young real estate agent, sensing the escalating tension, shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his eyes darting frantically between us, his youthful face a mask of acute embarrassment. My entire body felt like it was suddenly encased in lead, heavy, immobile, suffocated. The familiar crushing weight of invisibility, of being summarily dismissed, of being utterly discounted, crashed down on me with a renewed, devastating force. This was Sarah's masterpiece of humiliation, meticulously planned, perfectly executed, designed to destroy me in front of the very people whose respect I desperately sought. She wasn't merely barring me from a meeting. She was, with surgical precision, barring me from belonging, from existing within her perfectly curated, exclusive world. The familiar pang of shame, the tightening knot in my stomach, the scorching heat creeping up my neck. It was all there. Every ghost of 1,000 past slights rising from the depths of my memory, swirling around me, threatening to consume me whole. But this time, something felt different. Beneath the shame, a tiny defiant spark ignited, a nascent ember of rage that refused to be extinguished. This was the moment, the final straw. Just as Sarah, her eyes glittering with triumphant malice, was about to dismiss me with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand, a new figure stepped gracefully into the charged atmosphere, moving with an almost preternatural calm. He was Mr. Davies, the senior real estate agent, a man whose name was synonymous with integrity and discretion in the highest echelons of Greenwich property dealings. His tailored suit seemed to exude an aura of quiet, almost unimpeachable authority, and his presence immediately commanded a different kind of respect than Sarah's theatrical posturing. He had been quietly observing the unfolding drama from a discreet distance, a curious, almost knowing expression playing on his lips. He walked directly to Sarah, his face composed, a polite but firm smile on his lips. "Mrs. Dubois," he began, his voice calm yet carrying, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the growing crowd. "I believe there's been a slight, though rather significant, misunderstanding." He then turned his steady gaze to me, and to my utter astonishment offered me a small, almost imperceptible wink. "Ms. Dubois, I must sincerely apologize for the delay. I had genuinely hoped to catch you before the meeting began, to present you with some crucial documents. However, your sister," he paused, a slight, almost imperceptible lift of an eyebrow, "seemed quite assertive in her duties, shall we say." He then extended his hand, a gesture of genuine warmth and respect, one that instantly unknotted the tension in my shoulders and sent a surprising jolt of hope through my exhausted frame. Sarah's smug, triumphant smile, which had been plastered across her face, faltered, then dissolved completely, replaced by an expression of utter bewilderment. "Mr. Davies," she sputtered, desperately trying to regain control. "With all due respect, this is a private HOA matter. And my sister, she really isn't." He gently, yet unequivocally, interrupted her, his voice firm but never harsh. "Indeed, Mrs. Dubois, and it is precisely because of a profoundly important property matter that I am here this evening, specifically to see Miss Kate Dubois." He then turned his attention to the young real estate agent, who was still clutching his clipboard, his youthful face a canvas of escalating discomfort. "Young man," Mr. Davies addressed him, his tone carrying a mild reproof, "you seem to have unfortunately overlooked a rather significant detail on that list. Or perhaps you simply weren't privy to the most recent, and indeed most pertinent updates regarding local property ownership." With a deliberate, almost theatrical flourish, he reached into his own meticulously organized briefcase, pulling out a thick, official-looking document bound with a crimson ribbon. "Ms. Dubois," he announced, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity, handing me the crisp, heavy papers, "on behalf of the late Ms. Carol Dubois, and as per the explicit instructions of her legal counsel, it is now my profound honor and distinct privilege to officially present you with the deed to the haven. The transfer of ownership is now complete, legally executed, and all conditions stipulated in the will have been met, to the letter." My fingers, which had been trembling just moments before, now accepted the deed with a surprising steadiness. The sheer weight of it, the formal, almost archaic language embossed on the parchment, the tangible reality of it, it felt strangely exhilarating, profoundly validating. The haven. My haven. The excruciatingly long 1-year waiting period was finally over, and Aunt Carol's final, most mischievous and most generous legacy, my carefully guarded secret, was finally, irrevocably, revealed. Sarah's jaw, which had been tightly clenched in disdain, dropped open, her mouth agape. Her carefully constructed facade of impervious composure crumbled instantaneously, replaced by an expression of utter, soul-shattering shock. My parents, who had just made their grand entrance and were still trying to comprehend the unfolding spectacle, looked utterly bewildered, their faces a canvas of confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of alarm. Mr. Davies, observing the widespread astonishment, continued, his voice clear, resonant, and carrying to every corner of the now hushed ballroom. Furthermore, Ms. Kate Dubois, as the sole, rightful proprietor of the Haven, a property that, I might add, holds the largest continuous land parcel within this association's meticulous jurisdiction, and consequently contributes the highest annual fees to the HOA. You are not merely a homeowner. You are, unequivocally, the most significant, the most influential, and indeed the most prominent homeowner in this entire association. Therefore, your inclusion in any and all HOA meetings is not just a basic right, but an absolute necessity, a matter of paramount importance for the functioning of this community. He then turned his piercing gaze back to Sarah, his tone softening with an almost theatrical politeness, but his words were sharp, precise, and utterly devastating. And as a simple courtesy, Mrs. Dubois, I believe a proper, respectful greeting would be considerably more appropriate for your sister, the newest and by far the most prominent member of our esteemed community. Wouldn't you wholeheartedly agree? A collective gasp, almost a wave, swept through the now utterly silent room. The young real estate agent, his face flushing crimson, quickly fumbled to present me with a new, impeccably embossed guest badge. My name, Kate Dubois, proprietor, The Haven, was elegantly inscribed in flowing script, a testament to my newfound, undeniable status. For the very first time in my life, I wasn't just little Kate, the overshadowed sister. I was Kate Dubois, the legitimate, powerful owner of The Haven, a name that suddenly resonated with immense weight, profound respect, and undeniable influence in this elite, power-hungry community. Sarah, utterly speechless, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, could only stare, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning terror. The public humiliation she had so meticulously planned for me had, with an almost poetic justice, backfired spectacularly, now reflecting squarely, agonizingly, and irrevocably on her. The entire game had not just changed. It had been utterly, profoundly, and irrevocably redefined. My heart, which had been so accustomed to shrinking, to cowering in Sarah's condescending presence, now swelled with a fierce, unwavering, almost incandescent pride. This was more than just a deed. It was a declaration. It was my reclamation. The air in the Greenwich Country Club ballroom, which had been thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and the unspoken tension of decades of social climbing, now crackled with an almost tangible electric energy. It was the energy of a lightning strike, a sudden, powerful shift in an established order. Sarah's face, which only moments ago had been a mask of triumphant malice, was now a grotesque contortion of incredulity, her perfectly sculpted features twisted by a dawning, soul-chilling horror. My parents, who had, with their usual oblivious grace, been making their way towards me, clearly intending to deliver a lecture about making a scene, froze mid-stride. Their expressions, typically so composed and unreadable, were now a canvas of unadulterated shock, profound confusion, and a burgeoning, unmistakable fear. The other homeowners, usually so stoic and reserved, their faces carefully neutral to mask any true emotion, were now openly buzzing with astonishment, their whispers no longer polite murmurs, but outright exclamations, rippling through the room like a wave. I clutched the deed to The Haven in my hands. its crisp paper and embossed seal a physical anchor in this maelstrom of sudden change. Its weight, its cold, formal reality, grounded me, giving me a surprising sense of power. The formal language, the precise legal wording. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was years of silent suffering, of invisible battles fought within the confines of my own heart. Suddenly, spectacularly, validated. Mr. Davies, ever the paragon of professional composure, smoothly gestured towards the grand arched entrance of the ballroom. "Ms. Dubois," he announced, his voice calm yet carrying, cutting through the cacophony of gasps and whispers. "If you'd care to join us, the meeting is about to commence. And perhaps," he added, turning a pointed, almost surgical look towards Sarah, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white, "we could all benefit from a more inclusive and productive atmosphere. Wouldn't you agree?" A new, unfamiliar strength surged through me, a potent elixir that coursed through my veins, displacing decades of meekness. Years of being silenced, of being systematically overlooked, of having my voice perpetually muted, had culminated in this precise, incandescent moment. This wasn't, I realized with a surprising clarity, about petty revenge. It was about the raw, undeniable force of truth. I locked my gaze onto Sarah's, her eyes now wide with a dawning terror, and my voice, which had for a lifetime been accustomed to shrinking, now rang out, steady and unwavering, filling the sudden hush of the ballroom. "You wanted to know why I wasn't part of the homeowners association, Sarah," I began, each word a carefully aimed arrow. "Because for years, you, and by extension, our parents, made me feel like I wasn't part of anything. You celebrated every single one of your triumphs, no matter how trivial, with lavish fanfare, while my own modest achievements were either summarily ignored, or worse, dismissed with a patronizing chuckle as not quite Sarah level." I cast a pointed, almost accusatory, glance towards my parents, who were now standing in stunned silence, their faces etched with a dawning comprehension. "You both stood by Mom and Dad as Sarah relentlessly chipped away at my self-worth, systematically dismantling my confidence, making me feel like an alien in my own family, an unwelcome outsider in my own hometown, in the very community where I was born and raised." My mother, her face now a roadmap of conflicting emotions, finally managed to find her voice, a strained, almost tearful whisper. "Kate, darling, what on earth are you saying? This is preposterous. We love you, both of you, equally. You know that." I laughed, a sharp, bitter, almost hysterical sound that startled even me, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken pains. "Equally, really? Is that truly what you believe? Did you ever once bother to notice the countless, silent hours I spent working, grinding, struggling to keep my head above water in this exclusive and frankly suffocating community? Did you ever once ask why I chose to spend my precious free time sketching, painting, creating, rather than attending the endless, superficial social gatherings that you and Sarah so obviously adored, the ones where you performed your elaborate social dances? Did you ever, not even once, genuinely wonder why Aunt Carol, the eccentric one, the family outcast, was the only person who ever truly saw me, truly valued me for who I am, for my inherent qualities, and ultimately trusted me with her most precious legacy? I held up the deed, allowing it to catch the gleaming chandelier light, its legal formalisms now shining with a profound, almost spiritual significance. "Aunt Carol," I continued, my voice now laced with an undeniable quiet power, "Aunt Carol saw through the thinly veiled pretense that defines this town. She saw that while you, Sarah, relentlessly pursued fleeting power, ephemeral status, and superficial social standing, I, in my own quiet way, sought authenticity, genuine connection, and profound meaning. She knew with an uncanny foresight that this property, the Haven, with its rich, complex history and its undeniable, resilient soul needed someone who would truly cherish it, someone who would nurture its essence, not just ruthlessly flip it for a quick profit or use it as a mere backdrop for another vapid socialite photoshoot. My words, though not shouted, resonated with a searing clarity through the stunned silence of the ballroom, each syllable a precisely aimed arrow, piercing the carefully constructed illusions that had governed our lives. Sarah, now visibly shaking, her face a mask of barely contained fury and profound humiliation, tried desperately, almost pathetically, to regain some semblance of control. "This is utterly ridiculous." Aunt Carol was senile. "That old house is a money pit, a crumbling burden. You're just trying to ruin my night as always." "You're so jealous," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Ruin your night, Sarah?" I retorted, a flicker of something akin to pity, a fleeting moment of empathy for her profound self-deception passing through me. "No, Sarah, I'm merely reclaiming my own. You tried, with such calculated malice, to exclude me from a meeting in my community, in my hometown, in a property that now, thanks to Aunt Carol's incredible foresight and generosity, gives me more say, more influence, more undeniable power than you, in all your ambition will ever truly possess. The profound truth is, I was always here, Sarah. My presence was constant. You just willfully refused to see me. And now, my dear sister, you can no longer ignore me. Not anymore. Not ever again." A tentative applause, sparse at first, then growing into a resounding, undeniable ovation from a few of the more insightful, more empathetic homeowners, was the most validating, the most empowering sound I had ever heard in my entire life. My triumph, I realized, was not merely the ownership of a legal deed. It was the profound, exhilarating reclamation of my own voice, my own narrative, my own destiny. The scandal, a juicy, irresistible morsel for the insular world of Greenwich, spread like wildfire, fueled by the breathless whispers and eager titters of the country club attendees. Sarah's meticulously constructed image of the untouchable HOA president, the perfectly poised, effortlessly successful socialite, shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, much like the crystal chandelier I imagined falling from the ballroom ceiling. The local gossip columns, usually reserved for polite mentions of charity galas and philanthropic endeavors, had a veritable field day, turning the HOA showdown into the sensational, unescapable talk of the entire town. My name, Kate Dubois, once a mere whisper, a fleeting afterthought, was now on everyone's lips, spoken with a mixture of awe, respect, and a hint of trepidation. And for once, gloriously, it wasn't overshadowed by Sarah's. My parents, in a frantic, almost comical attempt to control the irreparable damage, called me repeatedly. Their calls, however, were not imbued with genuine concern for my well-being, but rather with panicked, desperate demands to fix this, to make this whole awful mess just go away. "Kate, what in God's name have you done?" My mother shrieked into the phone, her voice barely containing her hysteria. "The Petersons canceled their tennis club membership. They said Sarah is too much of a drama queen. Your father is absolutely furious, absolutely beside himself." My father, when I finally spoke to him, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage, was equally distraught, equally self-absorbed. "This is an absolute embarrassment, Kate. An utter disgrace. Your mother and I have worked for decades, for generations, to painstakingly build our impeccable reputation in this community. And you utterly destroyed it. In one fell swoop!" I listened to their self-pitying laments, the familiar litany of their own perceived victimhood, the absolute infuriating lack of understanding of my profound, decades-long pain, and a strange, almost serene calm settled over me. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. "You built a reputation on pretense, on illusion, on carefully curated appearances. I simply exposed the gaping cracks in that fragile facade. And if your reputation is so inherently fragile, so utterly hollow that a single undeniable truth can shatter it to bits, then perhaps it was never truly solid, never truly authentic to begin with. I hung up. A profound, almost dizzying sense of liberation washing over me, a sensation I had never thought possible. Sarah, meanwhile, spiraled. She tried desperately, almost pathetically, to regain her footing, to reconstruct the shattered pieces of her carefully crafted image. She called an emergency HOA meeting, hoping to manipulate the narrative, to discredit me, to paint me as the villain. But the other homeowners, still reeling from the shocking spectacle, no longer afforded her their blind loyalty. Questions sharp and probing were asked. Doubts, long suppressed, were openly voiced. The Community Beautification Fund, her pet project, the very instrument of my intended humiliation, was voted down with a resounding, humiliating defeat. Her carefully cultivated alliances began to fray, then unravel completely. Her husband, Pierre, a man as deeply invested in appearances as Sarah herself, grew visibly, painfully distant, clearly embarrassed by the public exposure, by the unmasking of his wife's true nature. Her reign as HOA president, once seemingly unshakable, a symbol of her absolute power, was now teetering precariously on the brink of collapse. She was, quite simply, losing everything she had built on the shifting sands of pretense. For me, the immediate aftermath of that explosive night was a strange, almost surreal, blend of exhilarating triumph and profound emotional exhaustion. The haven, now unequivocally mine, felt like a true sanctuary, a sacred space where I could finally, truly breathe, unfettered by the suffocating weight of familial expectations. The deed, now beautifully framed and proudly displayed on the wall of my modest townhouse, was a constant, tangible reminder of my hard-won victory. The community, once a relentless source of judgment and comparison, now looked at me with a newfound respect, an almost palpable curiosity, even a grudging admiration. Neighbors I had barely known, people who had once offered only fleeting, polite nods, now stopped me in the street to offer genuine congratulations, their eyes twinkling with a mixture of understanding and sheer delight at my courage. It was an unfamiliar, yet deeply gratifying feeling, this validation, this profound sense of being truly seen, truly acknowledged. I began with a newfound resolve to set boundaries. Firm, unapologetic, and non-negotiable boundaries. My parents' calls, once incessant demands for damage control, slowly transformed into tentative, almost hesitant requests. I agreed to meet them, but only on my terms, in neutral territory, and with a clear, unyielding agenda. Absolutely no discussions about Sarah's alleged victimhood, no patronizing lectures about my family obligations, only genuine, unfiltered conversation about our relationship, about our collective past, and about a possible, healthier future. Sarah I avoided completely. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep, the sting of her malice still too raw. The initial shock gave way to a quiet, simmering resentment from her, a toxic stew of anger and humiliation, but it no longer held any power over me. My life, I realized, with a profound sense of liberation, was no longer dictated by their approval or disapproval, by their petty judgments or their condescending praise. The air, once heavy with unspoken expectations, felt lighter, crisper, almost exhilarating. The crushing burden of constantly striving for their unattainable approval had finally, irrevocably lifted. I was no longer tirelessly striving to be enough for them. I was simply, gloriously enough for myself. And that, I understood, was the beginning of true freedom. The haven. It wasn't just an old house. It was a living, breathing canvas, a profound testament to Aunt Carol's visionary spirit, and, now, to my own blossoming transformation. The initial overwhelming shock of inheriting it had slowly faded, replaced by a deep, resonant sense of purpose, a guiding star in my newly charted life. My modest townhouse, which had long served as my sanctuary, my quiet retreat from the relentless pressures of Greenwich, now felt like a temporary waypoint, a brief pause on a much grander journey. The haven called to me, its ancient weathered stones whispering promises of transformation, of rebirth. It was a sprawling Victorian, undeniably beautiful, steeped in history and an almost tangible character, yet desperately, achingly in need of love, of meticulous attention, of profound repair. Leaky roofs that wept with every storm, vast, untamed gardens that had surrendered to the wild, faded, peeling wallpaper that clung to the walls like ghosts of a forgotten past. It was, undeniably, a colossal project, an overwhelming endeavor, but it was, crucially, mine. And for the very first time in my life, I embarked upon a project that didn't need to meet anyone else's stringent approval, anyone else's impossible standards. I poured every ounce of my heart and soul, every spare moment, every creative impulse, into its painstaking restoration. My background in graphic design, which had once felt so separate from the tangible world of architecture and construction, translated with a surprising, almost intuitive fluidity into architectural planning and intricate interior design. I meticulously researched the house's rich, complex history, poring over ancient blueprints, dusty archives, and forgotten deeds, uncovering hidden details about its original, pioneering owners, the vibrant, long-lost community that had once thrived around its ancient foundations. My singular aim was to honor Aunt Carol's unique spirit, to meticulously bring the haven back to its former glorious life, not as a sterile, high-end showpiece designed for fleeting admiration, a stark contrast to Sarah's meticulously curated, yet utterly soulless mansion, but as a vibrant, authentic, deeply soulful home. I spent countless arduous hours stripping away layers of old wallpaper, painstakingly refinishing the original antique floorboards, each polished plank revealing a story, and lovingly replanting Aunt Carol's wild, beautiful, once neglected garden, coaxing it back to its riotous, verdant splendor. My hands, which had for so long been accustomed only to the smooth, precise movements of a computer mouse and keyboard, now bore the honorable scars of calluses from heavy hammers, sharp trowels, and rough sandpaper. Each passing day, as the haven slowly, patiently, shed its decades of accumulated neglect and emerged, reborn, I too felt a profound part of myself being rebuilt, strengthened, healed. My parents, after the initial shockwaves and their frantic, ultimately futile attempts at damage control, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to recalibrate their perspectives. My mother, with a surprising tenderness, started sending me old articles she'd clipped from magazines, articles about historic home restoration, a tentative, almost fragile, olive branch extended across the chasm of our past. My father, to my utter astonishment, offered his formidable legal expertise, patiently guiding me through the bewildering labyrinth of zoning issues and historical preservation permits that inevitably arose during the restoration. They were still imperfect, still prone to making subtle, almost ingrained comparisons, still occasionally mentioning Sarah's latest, and now noticeably less glamorous, endeavors. But there was an unmistakable, quiet respect in their eyes, a newfound, if grudging, acknowledgement of my capabilities, of my independent strength. Sarah, however, remained steadfastly distant, an ice queen in her self-imposed exile. Her HOA presidency, once so seemingly unassailable, proved short-lived, irrevocably marred by the public scandal and a rapidly diminishing lack of community support. She retreated almost completely from the public eye, her once boastful social media posts becoming noticeably less frequent, less ostentatious, less triumphant. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, truly struggling, her carefully constructed facade of perfection finally cracking under the immense weight of her own unrealistic expectations, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. I felt no genuine joy in her misfortune, no triumphant glee, only a quiet, almost melancholic understanding of the profound loneliness that inevitably accompanies a life built entirely on artifice and inauthenticity. The haven blossomed into more than just a home. It transformed into a vibrant, thriving community hub, exactly as Aunt Carol, in her boundless wisdom, had envisioned. I established my art studio in one of the bright, airy, sun-drenched rooms on the ground floor, its large windows overlooking the newly revitalized garden. Here I began offering art classes to local children and eager adults, fostering a sense of creativity and connection. The sprawling garden, once a wild, untamed wilderness, now meticulously tended, yet retaining its beautiful, natural exuberance, hosted bustling local farmers' markets on weekends and intimate community events throughout the year. It became a cherished place of genuine connection, of shared creativity, and of profound warmth, everything my childhood home, in its sterile perfection, had never been. My social circle expanded exponentially, embracing a diverse tapestry of people who valued authentic depth over superficiality, genuine kindness over fleeting social status. I even dared to date again, and to my surprise and delight, I found a quiet, thoughtful, incredibly kind man who not only admired my hard-won resilience, but loved the haven almost as deeply, almost as intrinsically as I did. He saw not just the house, but the journey it represented. One crisp, clear autumn afternoon, as the golden sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, and I was peacefully raking a mosaic of red and gold leaves in the now flourishing garden, a familiar sleek black car, a luxury model that instantly screamed Greenwich money, pulled slowly up the gravel driveway. My heart gave a small, involuntary lurch. It was Sarah. She emerged from the car, her shoulders noticeably slumped, her usual impeccably tailored attire looking a little rumpled, a little less sharp than usual. She looked tired, profoundly, utterly exhausted. "Kate," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant, utterly devoid of its usual sharp, cutting edge. "Can we talk? Please?" I leaned on my rake, its handle cool against my hands, observing her with a lifetime of complex emotions and memories swirling through my mind. The bitter resentment, the searing anger I had carried for so long had, to my profound surprise, dissipated. It had been replaced by something quieter, something akin to understanding, even a fleeting moment of empathy. "Sure, Sarah," I replied, my voice calm, steady. I gestured towards an old, weathered stone bench nestled beneath the ancient oak tree, Aunt Carol's favorite spot. "Have a seat. Would you like some tea? Or perhaps a glass of chilled white wine?" We talked for what felt like hours, under the golden, dappled light filtering through the canopy of Aunt Carol's beloved ancient oak tree. Sarah, for the first time in her life, confessed her struggles, her profound feeling of being utterly lost without the external validation she had always craved, the immense, suffocating pressure to meticulously maintain an impossible image of perfection. She admitted, with a surprising vulnerability, how much she had deeply resented my quiet strength, how it had, ironically, made her feel profoundly insecure, inadequate in her own superficial world. She even tentatively offered an apology, not a grand sweeping gesture, but a raw, unvarnished admission of guilt for the years of emotional neglect, for the public humiliation at the HOA meeting, for systematically making me feel invisible, unworthy. "Aunt Carol," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, looking around at the vibrant, flourishing garden with a wistful gaze. "Aunt Carol saw something in you that I, in my blindness, never did." "She saw this. She saw you." I simply nodded, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves above us. Healing, I realized, was not about erasing the painful past, but about bravely acknowledging it, accepting its indelible mark and consciously choosing a new, healthier path forward. I never fully forgave Sarah, not in the sense of completely wiping away the past, not in the way one might forgive a minor transgression. The wounds ran too deep, the scars too numerous. But I understood her, and in that understanding, I found a fragile yet profound form of peace. The haven, my haven, stood as a living, breathing testament to that arduous, yet ultimately triumphant journey. It was a cherished place where my inherent worth was self-evident, where my painful past no longer dictated my vibrant present, and where my future stretched before me like a vast, unblemished canvas ready to be painted with the boldest, most authentic colors of my own choosing. I had not merely inherited an old house. I had, in a far more profound sense, inherited myself. I was Kate Dubois, the proud, unyielding owner of the haven, and more importantly, the undeniable owner of my own destiny, no longer seeking validation from anyone but the quiet, resolute wisdom of my own heart. And that, I realized, was the greatest, most luxurious, and most enduring gift of all.